Well, good evening to you. Welcome to the 2017 Telkom 947 Cycle Challenge training webinar. It's awesome to have you with us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear us 100%, and then hopefully you'll be able to see us in a few seconds as well as I introduce ourselves. But just to make sure that everyone is able to hear us, if I could ask you to, in the comments, you'll see there's a little section below the video player on the website where you can pop your comments in. That's also where you're going to be popping your questions in tonight as well. So if you've got any questions, you can pop them into that section of the website. And yeah, we'll get to those as we go through this evening. So make sure you get your questions in. It's a very good evening to you from myself. My name is Brad Brown. With me, I've got high-performance cycling coach Devlin Eden with us this evening as well. And just to, as I said, if you've got any comments or questions, pop them into the area below. And yeah, who are we? So that's who I am. It's a great pleasure to have you with us this evening. And as I mentioned, we've got Devlin Eden as well. Devlin, welcome onto the webinar. Thanks for joining us tonight, mate. It's good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks. Looking forward to it.
Dev, just a bit of background for everyone in case they wanted to know. I've got a bit of a radio background. Funnily enough, used to work for 94.7 many years ago. And yeah, spent about 10 years of my radio career working for them. I've ridden the race lots and lots of times. Your background, you're a sports scientist based at the High Performance Centre in Pretoria. You're a cyclist yourself as well. You've ridden the Epic and you've done a whole bunch as well. Tell us a little bit about yourself for people who aren't really sure who you are. What's your sort of background?
Yeah, so you've sort of hit it there. My main background is sports scientist, qualified as a sports scientist. I'm a passionate cyclist, by no means an elite level cyclist, but love a good challenge, love to take on some crazy events and find myself in sort of dark places and big challenges. Yeah, and then been coaching for a few years now as well, so working with an array of athletes from complete beginners, youngsters in school level, right the way up to working with athletes such as William McCorpo, who's actually at World Champs at the moment, mountain bike World Champs. So yeah, been coaching an array of athletes all across the board, and then focusing with, like I said, the background of sports science work, their monitoring of training, setting up training programs and that, and then the strength and conditioning side of things as well. So the gym work and making sure that the guys are conditioned well enough to be on the bike and injury-free at the same time.
Dev, talking about William, he's an incredible cyclist, particularly mountain bike. That's what he specialises in. But he's a product of the Dipsfluid Mountain Bike Academy, and he's an incredible guy. I've had a bit to do with him through radio, and he's just growing in stature as a cyclist. He's a phenomenal talent, isn't he?
Indeed, and positive mind like you've never met anyone. I mean, not a lot gets the guy down, even if he gets knocked every now and again with the odd bad result. And we unfortunately had a little bit of a slow season last year with him going through injuries and illness. And he's just come back strength at the moment. I mean, won the Exara category at the Epic earlier this year. Done well in a couple of races, local races, qualified to go to World Champs now as well. So yeah, he's a phenomenal guy, works really hard, very dedicated, and like I said, just sort of a positive mind frame more than anything else.
Cool. Well, Dev, let's talk quickly what we're going to be running through tonight here on the webinar, and just to give people some direction with regards to what we wanted to touch on and what we're going to chat about. Obviously, we're going to talk about where you should be right now from a training perspective. Also, what you can be doing over the next 4 weeks, and we're going to break it up into the different sort of time categories. So, sub 6 hour, people who are just going for a finish, a sub 5 hour, sub 4 hour, and then a sub 3 hour. And we'll be touching on nutrition and bike setup, and then also sharing some resources to help you. And Dev, let's jump straight into the content, and let's talk about, it's just less than 12 weeks to go to race day now. And before we get into those sort of specific ones, I think consistency is probably the key for everyone across the board with regards to what they need to be doing between now and race day if they want to achieve the goals. Tell us about the role of consistency.
Yeah, look, I think the consistency will go across from whether you're looking at finishing your first 947 or whether you're aiming at doing a sub 3 hour race. The biggest thing there is if you're losing time by not training or taking weeks off, and unfortunately things like that do happen with illness and injury and that sort of thing, but consistency is going to be 100% key to keeping. So even if you're not necessarily doing the exact amount of volume and high intensity training and whatever it might be, as long as you are consistently training at the moment and have been training for the last sort of few months, especially throughout the winter periods, I think that's more key. If you're looking as a complete beginner or someone that's looking just to get started with 947, you've got enough time. There's nothing to completely panic about. But going forward now, it's a case of setting up, making sure that week in and week out you are getting the miles in, the time on the bike, and you're not missing out. You shouldn't be leaving it any later than now to be training.
Dev, let's talk about the sub 5 and 6 hour. And you mentioned you should have been training through winter, but we all know the reality of things. A lot of people haven't, and they're probably in a bit of a panic right now because they're worrying that they have to have been training right throughout winter. But 12 weeks is enough of a block that if you are just hoping for a finish on this thing, if you consistently train between now and race day, you'll suffer a bit on race day, but at least you'll get your medal. What should the guys and girls who are going for a sub 5 hour and a sub 6 hour be focusing on? Where should they be about now in their training?
Exactly. So for those just getting through the race, and again, look, if you are consistently training, you're not necessarily gonna hurt too much on race day. So again, you have got time between now and race day to get the volume up, to get the training happening. It's important to know that the focus needs to be sort of on the longer rides still at this time. So especially if you have come through a pretty lazy winter and you haven't done too much, now it's just about don't jump into overload volume, but focusing on easier rides, getting time in the saddle more than anything else. And start getting yourself, I would assume by now, and the fact that you are logged on to the webinar, for instance, is that you are committed to some form of structured training. So whether it is following a training program going forward or just using some of the tips that we might be giving you over the series of these talks, but just working on some sort of structure going forward in your training, be it intensity kind of work, doing some hill work, doing the long rides, focusing on a little bit of recovery. There's a couple of aspects that will come into it. And you need to be looking at least one long ride on a weekend with maybe 1 or 2 rides in the week. So if you can be on the bike sort of 2 to 3 times throughout the week, you'll get enough in for race day.
Okay, cool. That's the sub 5 and 6. Let's talk about the guys and girls who are going for a sub 4. Where should they be right about now in their training?
So these guys are typically going to have probably done a little bit more riding over the winter. So possibly the riders, either slightly stronger riders or riders that are a little bit more committed and haven't sort of just decided to do the race. So by now, definitely looking at 3 rides a week at least. That the guys should have been doing and currently are doing. Same sort of thing. By here, you probably would have some structure in your training already. So you wouldn't be doing intervals, and that wouldn't be anything new to you. So again, making sure that you are doing the right kind of intervals. We are now just looking at about 11 weeks out. So 11 weeks out now, we're still doing some of the longer intervals, focusing a little bit on some of the strength kind of stuff, maybe a few hill repeats here and there in your program. But making sure that there is focus, and again, the word consistency just creeps in here. It's about getting the volume in now and slowly start increasing going forward.
Okay, then the sub 3 hours. These are the guys and girls who, it's an awesome goal. I've done a couple of these, 2 of them, and you need to have a really good base in order to go for a sub 3. There's a couple of things you want to look at with regards to getting in the right seating group. But where should people be right now if they're aiming a sub 3 hour 947 cycle challenge, Steph?
So sub 3, realistically, these are kind of the athletes that have been training throughout the year. So actively training all year round, and not necessarily just training for this event, but probably would have done a couple of other races, whether it's seeding races for 94.7, whether it might have been 1 or 2 other road rides, mountain bike rides, whatever it might be. But you're typically your active, regular seasoned riders. From this sort of place, I think now is, again, we're coming in, the weather's getting a little bit warmer. The focus now is time in the saddle as well, and now increasing the training volume. So you have been training, like you've mentioned, there should be a pretty good base, But now it would be a case of, all right, now it's the time to step up from here and start focusing a little bit more on the training itself rather than just getting the base in.
Cool. So that's the base, and I'm sure you don't want people to get too sort of fixated on the base because, like I said, some people might not have trained through, but the next 4 weeks are going to be vital with regards to getting things done. And let's talk about what people should be focusing on for the next 4 weeks. Dev, let's start with those people who are possibly doing their first one and want to do it just to finish sub 6 hour. What should people be focusing on if they're chasing a sub 6 hour Telkom 947 this year, Dev?
All right, so as we've touched on, so no later than now. So this is definitely the time to, if you haven't been doing very much training, now is the time to start. So you do need to get cracking. You can't leave it too much later. The next 4 weeks now is when we talk about increasing training volume, especially for these athletes that haven't been doing very much or have decided to take on a new challenge, you need to gradually increase the training load. So we're looking at about 11 weeks out at the moment. If we work back from race day, what we would typically do is have about a 2-week taper before the race. Again, this is pretty generic and quite determined on the individual itself. But if we had to use sort of the rule of thumb, we would look at about a 2-week out taper. You would then work another 4-week good block on that. So that'll take us up to 6 weeks, which basically leaves us with about 5 weeks now before that second block. So now would be a case of increasing the training volume gradually. So from week in and week out now, increasing it by probably half an hour, 15 minutes to half an hour per ride that you can slowly start increasing. So what I mean by that is if you're doing an hour twice a week and then happening on a weekend, if for instance you're doing a 2-hour ride, then the following week you can look at doing a 2.5-hour ride and working those sort of distances on the weekend. So it's a gradual increase. Remember, we also don't want to be overloading. We don't want to be doing too much now, and that tends to happen with a lot of the guys that take on a challenge like this. They start to panic and they think, cool, we see the guys riding out in the cradle or wherever it might be, and they get on their bikes and they're just trying to overload. So just be careful of that. That's cautious. You got to be cautious. So like I said, probably one long ride over a weekend at least, and at least 2 shorter rides in the week. And the 2 shorter rides in the week you can make use of a couple of maybe hilly kind of routes, working some intensity at the moment.
Dev, if I can just jump in there as well, and you talk about the guys and girls who panic and try and do too much too soon. Am I right in saying it's better to do a little bit every single week for the next 12 weeks or 11 weeks, however long it is to race day, than to try and do as much as you can in the first week now, and then you get injured or you get sick because your immune system takes a bit of a knock because you're overtraining, and then you miss a week's training? Would you say it's better to do a little bit consistently as opposed to trying to get one big weekend and then you go and do damage to yourself?
It's exactly that, and I suppose we could probably coin the buzz term for tonight as consistency in the training. So it's exactly that. I mean, if you're going to overload now, especially if you are coming from not having done very much in the last couple of months or at all, if you do try and overload now and you try and push firstly intensity and too much volume in the first couple of weeks, you are going to overload quite quickly and you are going to probably get sick. Your immune system's going to take a little bit of a knock. Injury is not always the biggest risk here, purely because it's not necessarily a high impact sport. It's not like running in that, but definitely from a health point of view, you are at risk. Where if you tap it off slightly and, like you mentioned, do a little bit and gradually build over the next couple of weeks, you'll find yourself in good stead.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool, Dev. Let's talk about the sub-5ers now. The guys and girls who are going for the sub-5. What should they focus on the next 4 weeks?
So this will be very similar to the sub 6 hour in the sense of still gradually increasing as well, increasing the training volume. So just to make sure that we are 100% clear on the difference between volume and training load or intensity, is volume is the amount of hours in the week. So don't necessarily be too fixated on distance and riding, because the race is 94 kilometers, that you need to be riding 94 kilometers now. That's not what it's about. It's more about the amount of hours in the week. So we gradually, that's where we refer to training volume. The training load, or the intensity rather, is how hard you're actually pushing yourself in each of those rides. So for now, like I say, the long ride over the weekends is typically going to be a lower intensity, but getting time in the saddle. And then we're looking at about 2 rides in the week that we're possibly looking now. sort of lost my train of thought. Oh, the 2 rides in the week where we might be looking at a little bit shorter interval kind of things, maybe pushing the intensity a little bit harder. And then what we can look at is incorporating one maybe interval session into those week rides. And when I say intervals, I'm talking threshold kind of stuff at about a 75 to 85 kind of % intensity, and those are being intervals, so it'll be on for a certain amount of time and off for a certain amount of time. And at this stage in the training cycle, if you are going to incorporate intervals, you probably should be looking at slightly longer intervals. So I'm referring to 5-minute or 10-minute kind of intervals, also depending on what level you're at the moment. And then this early stage, definitely start trying to incorporate, when you're doing your long rides over the weekend or whatever ride it actually might be, try and incorporate hilly routes, so you are getting used to rolling hills and a bit of climbing, because trust me, on race day you're going to be faced with a bit.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those races that if you can get some hills in, you are going to do yourself some favors as well. Dev, let's take a squiz at the sub 4 hours now. This is a very cool goal that I think if people are willing to put the work in, they can definitely achieve it. I think anyone with a little bit of cycling ability can do a sub 4 hour. What should the guys and girls be focusing on for this one?
Yeah, so again, across the board, and I've probably said one more time, just we can go all the way down to the sub 3 hours, is definitely increased in training load still, training volume rather. With a sub 4 hour, again, we're dealing with athletes that are relatively well seasoned riders. They're riders that have been training a fair amount. So to kind of take not necessarily the monotony out of the training, but just to add another aspect to it, is maybe looking at adding a little bit of cross training into the program. So the cross training might be swimming one session a week, or maybe doing a light run here and there. Keeping in mind that obviously if you're not used to running, don't think you can go and run an hour because you were supposed to do an hour cycling session. So that is something just to keep in mind. We don't want to start picking up any niggles and injuries. And then also potentially looking at a little bit of strength work. So gym stuff, body weight kind of work, a lot of core strength, maybe even throwing in a Pilates session. So when I'm mentioning these as different options, not trying to fit them all in as cross-training in the week, firstly. Then with the intervals in the week, is maybe start adding some hill repeats itself. So I've mentioned some of the early, the sub 5 and 6 hours to be doing hilly routes and hill riding. But here I'm referring a little bit more to actual doing hill repeats. So getting on the bike, making sure that you are doing a nice hard interval session on a pretty steep climb. When you are doing this, it is important to make sure you're working in adequate rest between each of these repeats. So you can go on a minimum of a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you're doing a 3-minute repeat, you need at least a 3-minute rest in between if you're going to be able to put that sort of intensity back in each repeat. What I would even suggest is you could probably go to about a 4 or 5-minute rest in between each of those sort of repeats. And then for this now, again, sub 4 hour, there is quite a push for a goal. So now start looking, if you haven't already started, at looking maybe for some seeding races that are available to help yourself achieve that goal in terms of getting a good starting time on race day and not having too much traffic out in front of you.
Cool. Dev, got a question in, and keep those questions coming in, by the way. I'm also going to, there's a chat bar underneath the video on the coachparry.com website that you can submit your questions. You can do them on YouTube as well, or you can pop them onto email, support@coachparry.com. That's where you can get them through to. Got one in, it doesn't have a name on, but it says, can you rely on running fitness alone to complete the race? Currently training for the Soweto Marathon. Dev, can you do this if you're only running?
Look, you'd probably get away with it. So from a running point of view, the running does tend to benefit the cycling quite well from a strength point of view in the legs. And generally the fitness is there. So they will correlate to a certain degree. But taking the fitness out of it, it's more the confidence of being on your bike. So if you haven't been on the bike for a couple of months and running's been your only focus, you don't really want to get on your bike just before race day or just on race day and hope for a good result. So based on that, I'm not quite sure what your goal necessarily is for the race. But my recommendation would be at least be getting in one longish ride on the weekend. In doing that as well, you are training, and I'm pretty sure any of the running coaches out there, and I know Linz is a big advocate for it, but maybe using a cycling ride once a week as a cross training for your running. So you're not necessarily loading there too much on the legs. You can get a nice, decent training session in, but doing it on the bike, that's taking a little bit of the load off the legs as well. So my suggestion would be to actually get on the bike now, especially sort of in the last sort of 6 to 8 weeks, but get on the bike at least once a week, maybe once or twice more closer to the event. Just get comfortable, get confident on the bike, get used to riding around people again and on the roads. I wouldn't rely just on running for that.
It can be done. I know lots of people have done it. It's not the ideal. I mean, you can do it, but if you, I would also suggest get out on the bike and also just get used to riding around people. It's one of those things. Another question in, Dev, we're going to get to that sub 3 hour in just a moment, and I'm going to combine these two questions because they sort of follow on from each other. And it's from Ragas11 saying, going for a sub 4, ideally a 3:30, currently doing 2 to 3 spin classes a week, plus a long ride on the weekend, 90 to 180 minutes ride. Been going for the past 3 weeks, wasting time or more to add? And then Louise wanted to know, with regards to that question, how does a spinning class compare to being on the bike outdoors? Obviously, from a time perspective, Dev, not everyone can ride all their training sessions outdoors all the time. Your thoughts on that? Is Ruggers on track, and what's the deal with the indoor?
Yeah, so look, I'm just going to answer sort of on the spinning point first. So I feel, and without necessarily stepping on any toes or causing any issues, the spinning side of things I think definitely has its place. Also depending on what level of cyclist you're at. The only concern for me with a spinning class is the spinning classes aren't always focused around what you as an individual, what your goal is. So it's a generic one-size-fits-all. You go into a spinning class and everyone's doing the same type of intensity. With that, I would rather recommend maybe looking at a structured program. So intervals and the high intensity is great, but at the moment, typically in a spinning class, you might be doing really short, sharp, very high intensity work, which is something that's going to help with speed and explosive kind of power, but not necessarily the sustained long threshold kind of intervals and those kind of efforts. So my recommendation would be to maybe, again, I'm not saying don't do a spin class, but if you are going to be looking for intensity and intervals, you don't need a lot of time for it, but you can do, if you are going to a gym already, most of your gyms have things like a watt bike or a stationary bike of some sort, or if you're putting your bike on a stationary trainer at home, getting on that and following a structured program that's then going to be targeting longer intervals and something that's focused around what your goal is. If you are looking, so Ruggers there is talking about doing a 3:30, so 3:30 with 2 spin classes a week. Again, I think that it has its room, but just be careful on the sense of the spin class is it's very short and sharp, and it is high intensity. Your focus there needs to maybe try and incorporate then at least one longer ride in the week. So even if you are doing one on the weekend at the moment, that might be a relatively tempo to a sort of moderate intensity ride. Maybe add a second one on the weekend that's a little bit shorter but at a lower intensity then, or somewhere midweek that you are getting at least an hour and a half to 2 hours if you can on the bike as well. So a sub 4 hour or a 3:30 is a pretty decent goal, and depending on what level you are already, I do feel you're going to need a little bit more than just 2 spin classes and one long ride in the week.
Dev, on that subject, what bike better option than straight up spinning?
Personal preference, I say yes. Again, there's going to be a couple of guys that might not necessarily agree with me. Why I like the watt bike is the actual time feedback we're dealing with. The bike has got a real comfortable feel for it, and the feedback you're getting off the console as well. So you're working on a particular number and a goal, and you can make your training that much more specific and more accurate. So fine-tune your training a little bit more. You're on a spinning bike, it's got a magnetic, heavy flywheel, so you can't necessarily stop pedaling all of a sudden. But also with it, you don't know what kind of intensity you're putting out. You're going purely on a feel. And as much as all of us like to think we know our bodies, from a performance point of view, we don't always know exactly what intensity we're putting out. And society today is we are limited for time. So we're trying to crush and kill ourselves in a 45-minute session as hard as we can and not necessarily getting a lot of benefit from it. Yeah. So my recommendation there, and why I do like the watt bike, is we've got powers and heart rates coming back at us, so a bit of feedback, so we know we're working at a right intensity. And whether it is a watt bike or your stationary Wahoo kickers or whatever it might be, there's various tools out. But those are the kind of tools that I'd probably be leaning more towards what I like to call the quality sessions, so your interval type sessions.
Absolutely. Cool, Dave. Let's talk sub 3. These are the racing snakes, and this is an amazing goal to have for the race. What do they need to be focusing on for the next 4 weeks?
So the racing snakes are The guys are a strange breed in the sense that they do like to hurt themselves.
What are you trying to say about me, Dev?
You know exactly what I'm trying to say. No, I think more from this point is I'd like to just sort of err on the side of caution here, in the sense of your sub 3 hour guys. It's not all about high intensity. It's not all about breaking yourself at every training session. So you still need to be doing at least one, what we call an LSD ride, or a long slow distance type of ride over a weekend. And I would maybe suggest even doing that on a Sunday. So you can be doing 2 to 3 hours on a Sunday. I like to throw in what I call a coffee ride into some of my programs, where feel free to stop en route and grab a coffee or a breakfast or what have you, but get time in the saddle at a lower intensity. The Saturday ride could be where you're killing yourself with a club ride or with a group, trying to throw a little bit of sort of proving who's better and faster than the other. And so don't be scared to put long, easier rides into your training throughout the week. Like I mentioned, the club ride, the fast tempo kind of ride is going to be key still. So that's obviously where you're also getting a feel for that constant confidence in riding with people, getting a feel for how to draft, how to do your turn on the front and working a little bit. We need to then be throwing in a little bit more focus around the interval. So at least one threshold, longer interval type sessions should be getting done in the week, as well as one strength focused interval. So again, I'm talking from about a 12 to 11 week out block at the moment for the next 4 weeks. What I'm referring to by strength focused interval sessions is not gym work. So it's still on the bike, but here we start talking something that we might call overgear work. So high resistance, low cadence. So more of a grinding kind of action. And this will also simulate pretty steep climbing and that kind of work. So this is something that is important to be building the strength in the leg. So where we are at the moment, and closer to the race, we'll then start working away from that and working more the speed and the power kind of work. But at the moment, threshold and strength work as one of each of those kind of interval sessions. Like I've touched on already, definitely throw in some heel repeats. So if you're not doing the strength focused interval session, then do a heel repeat session on a pretty steep kind of climb. Those all work quite well. Again, make sure when you are doing high intensity sessions like that, you are working in adequate rest. And then the same thing as well, seeding races. Get to seeding races as much as you can. Chances are these athletes have already done a few seeding races and are pretty well seeded. It is important, if you are targeting a sub 3, to try and get a good start time on race day. If you've got traffic out in front of you, it really does jeopardize your chances of hitting that goal.
Yeah, Dev, I can't speak highly enough about getting a decent seeding time and a decent start time. And the reason I say that is both of my sub 3s were on the front end of a double. So the reason we got the good seeding, it was for charity, and we got to go off like really early, and it makes such a big difference if you are in one of those batches. So if you are chasing the sub 3, seriously get yourself into one of those good seeding batches, because you are up against it if you are having to fight the masses. Get into a bunch and just hang on for dear life, and that's probably my best advice to getting yourself a sub 3. Dev, as far as got a question in from Katrin, keep those questions coming, by the way. support@coachparry.com is where you can email them to. You can also pop them below the video right now, and we'll get to them as well, hopefully throughout the evening. And hopefully we get through all the questions tonight. We'll try our best to get through them. But a question in from Katrin Dixon asking about cadence. What's the deal with cadence? Should we be training with regards to a specific cadence? What are your thoughts?
So cadence, again, look, this is often a pretty tricky question, and again will largely be dependent on the level of rider that you're at the moment. There are various schools of thoughts. I like to try and keep something, firstly, depending on what level you're at, try and keep a cadence that is comfortable for you. So we've got time that we can start playing around, maybe trying to get a faster cadence if you're someone who rides with a slightly slower cadence. Typically, your bigger, stronger powerhouse kind of riders are riders that need a lower cadence, need a higher gear, and struggle with a higher cadence. So, and that spinning out sort of action just does force a lot more of a cardiovascular effect on the body. So you might be out of breath a little bit quicker from a higher cadence, but not necessarily, you'll be saving the legs a little bit. You won't have as much of a muscle recruitment and sort of tension and hard stress on the legs. Whereas the other way around, when you start dealing high resistances and a lower cadence, you're grinding, so it hurts the legs a lot more, but not necessarily too much on the cardiovascular system, in the sense of you're not going to feel completely out of breath doing it. What I like to do, and this is something that does tend to happen over a period of time and something that does need to be trained, but I try and get my athletes to sit at a moderately high cadence. So when we start looking at a cadence of about an 85 or 90 RPM plus, sitting there and trying to get that as consistent as possible. So when you're doing any of your interval type sessions as well, doesn't matter what the resistance is, but try and focus on keeping a consistent cadence. If you can focus on a consistent cadence and change your resistance accordingly, so if the gradient in the road changes slightly and you start going uphill, as long as what I'm trying to do from an effect point of view is not chop and change your cadence, so not surge and go fast and then grind and go slow and stop-start. If you can keep it as consistent as possible, you're going to have a sort of a longer time to fatigue, if that makes any sense. So you can keep it consistent. As the gradient starts to change, it might be trying to keep it a nice consistent 90 RPM or an 85 RPM. And if you drop one gear or you get into a slightly easier gear as the road starts going up, you can still be maintaining that. I see it all too often where guys, the minute a road starts to go uphill, they suddenly jump a couple of gears and they start spinning out. So now what happens is you're already flicking a match or two trying to spin out, but you've lost all that momentum that you were carrying yourself into that climb as well. So what I like to do is I like to try and keep the cadence as consistent as possible and slowly, just gradually change the resistance, change your gears as need be. You're obviously going to get to a time where you are grinding flat out and it's a pretty steep climb, and obviously your cadence is going to drop, and that's natural and depending on the terrain and the kind of route that you are riding. But what I'd like to do is, as far as possible, try and keep it as consistent as possible and change your resistance to work on a feel, if that makes sense.
Cool. Dev, another question in, and it's got to do with riding in a group as opposed to riding on your own on race day. It says, I've done a few 94.7s riding by myself. How important is riding within a group or with a partner to help improve your time?
Yeah, so look, that's going to hugely improve your time. So there's a couple of things. If you're riding with a partner, with a mate, and it's one other person, usually they're not necessarily from a performance point of view, but that'll help a lot with motivation. So when you get out onto the route and you say you've done this a couple of times on your own, you'll know that there's times where you're exhausted and you start questioning why you're out there and how long it's going to take. And to take that next step and to start kicking back into gear is quite difficult. If you're riding with a partner or a friend or whatever, that little bit of motivation there tends to help out quite a lot. When we start talking riding in groups, the nice thing with that though is it really does, if you're doing your work on the front and then filter your way to the back of the group, you're saving a lot of energy in sitting in the back of the group and letting the next person do their turn on the front. From a wind resistant point of view, you'll actually feel that you're getting pulled along the route a little bit. My suggestion there is, with that though, is you need to be comfortable in riding in a group. So from a safety point of view, you need to be used to having people around you at all times, being able to sort of anticipate what might happen. So if a rider changes direction in front of you, if a rider's touching your elbows next to you, whatever, you just need to be confident enough. So I would suggest also now already getting into some group rides, club rides, and getting confident with that. And you'll start to feel in training already how much easier some of your training rides might be working with a group and letting each other do the time on that. On the note, and I have sort of touched on you doing your part in the front, just please, if you are going to be working in a group, I like to always ask the guys just to do your bit in the front. So we often get to race there and you working hard, and next thing you look behind you and you've got 4 or 5 riders that are tucked onto your back wheel and loving the fact that you're doing the work, and when you move over for someone else to do the work, they're not interested. So if you are going to sit in a group, make sure you're doing a little bit in the front. And then when it comes to race day, and if you have started on your own, there's also nothing to say that you can't join a group. So what will often happen is you'll see early on in the race when you guys get onto the highway and you start shunting, there's a lot of excitement. So fit in, look for a group, but just be careful not to be overstretching yourself too early, because what will tend to happen is you're excited, you think, geez, my average is flying, I'm in for a sub 3 hour when your goal was only a sub 5 hour. And before you know it, 30, 40 Ks into the race, you flick the matches and now you're on your own and you can't handle it. So just you'll get a feel for that group. You'll make sure that you're not overstretching. If you feel you are overstretching, rather just tap back. There will be another group that will come past that will probably be more suited to your speed, or you'll start to get guys around you that you might be able to sort of form your own group. And then try work together, get the guys to do their turn on the front, you do your turn on the front, and it'll definitely save you a lot of energy over the race.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I mean, you mentioned riding in club rides and races, sort of smaller races. That's also a great way to get a seeding. And those seeding groups are interesting because you'll be placed in a sort of group of riders similar to your ability. So you're not going to end up, like you say, going out too fast or going out too slow. You'll end up around cyclists that are pretty similar to you. Keep those questions coming. Some cool ones coming through tonight. One from Louise. Quick before we get into looking at nutrition and bike setup, Dev. Louise wanted to know, would slicks on a mountain bike make a significant difference on race day?
They definitely do. So there's a huge proportion of the field that actually ride the race on mountain bikes, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. My suggestion would, if you can put slicks on, definitely go for it. You're making your life that little bit easier. You've got less of a rolling resistance on the road. Your bike might look a little bit strange because it's not used to having slicks on it, but definitely it's going to help out. If you're lucky enough to have a bike also with the possibility of locking your suspension out, then definitely do that as well. It just makes the bike a little firmer, and all the energy and the power that you're putting into the bike can go in a forward motion rather than bobbing up and down with your suspension that's fully active as well. So if you're going to do it on your mountain bike, try to lock your suspension out if you have that option, and definitely if you can get slicks on the bike, it'll make your life a bit easier.
Dev, let's talk nutrition. Sort of this is obviously, we want to talk race day nutrition, but your nutrition plan starts now and it's in training. The last thing you want to do is arrive at the expo or the day before race day and going, oh, what am I going to have in my bottles? What am I planning on eating? Now's the time to have that plan in place.
Exactly that. And I think this topic, well, it applies to everyone, but I think definitely to the newbies, the beginners that's doing their first race, first 947. Now is the time, as you've mentioned, Brad, to be playing around. And I'm not necessarily saying you need to be riding with this particular brand or what have you. Go out, get a feel for it. You might know people that are currently using something, sample whatever they've got. Some of the nutrition supplements that are out there are quite expensive. So you do want to, if possible, try and play around with a couple of different options, see how it works for you on the bike. It's important to also then start looking at a nutrition strategy though as well. So we'll obviously touch on it a lot closer to race day and how you're going to work on that. But I think for now, just get an idea for, if you're going out, you need to be probably putting in somewhere in the region of about 50 to 60 grams of carbs into your body an hour. So I don't want to go too much into the debate on what we should be putting in from a fuel source, but you need to be putting that fuel into your body. So if we start talking about 50 to 60 grams of carbs, typically we're looking at one 750 ml bottle every hour that needs to be drunk. So if you got to take a little bit of planning into account here. And if you are going to be out for a 3-hour ride, make sure that you've got enough sort of remix, or you're carrying enough fluid on you that you've got 3 750 ml bottles worth. Or alternatively, what I typically do is I've got a bottle of mix, so my carbohydrate drink, whatever I use, as well as a bottle of water. And I then I stretch that over a 2-hour period, but by doing that, I'm also taking in food at the same time to make up for the same amount of carbohydrate intake over the time. So you got to find something that works for you. If you are a newbie, if you're someone who's not necessarily very comfortable on the bike yet, this is another thing that you need to be playing around with now in training. Get used to reaching for your water bottle and drinking while you're riding. You don't want to find yourself having to stop on the side of the road because the confidence isn't there. So start playing around with reaching for water bottles, pulling your water bottle out of the cage, having a sip, putting it back while you're still on the move, reaching into your back pocket, or if you've got a little pouch on your handlebar, on your top tube, that you can reach in, grab some food. Get used to those sort of mechanisms that need to happen on the ride, and then play around with food as well. So I personally don't like to do too much sweet stuff. I just can't handle it. So then what I look at doing is adding a little bit of savory as well. So whether it's some driv horse in a back pocket, peanuts and raisins, peanut butter sandwiches, whatever it might be, but start playing around with solid foods as well. If you are looking at spending a long time out there, I can tell you now you're going to get over drinking sweet stuff and eating sweets very quickly. So don't be hesitant to play around with solid food and more savory kind of options at the same time.
Yeah, Dev, it's also important to note, particularly, as you say, the guys and girls who are possibly doing their first one and are going to be out there for a while. You might be doing your long training rides on a Saturday or a Sunday morning and you're going out pretty early at 7 o'clock. But where you're only starting at, let's say, 9:30 or 10 o'clock and you're going to be out there for 6 hours, I mean, think about that on a normal day. If you're going to be quite nervous on race morning, so you might not have a decent breakfast, and then chances are you're going to be out there over lunch. Just do that on a normal day where you skip breakfast and skip lunch and see how you feel. And now you're going to be cycling through some pretty tough terrain. It can get quite hot as well. So you really want to get that sorted now and make sure your nutrition is right come race day for that. Like I said, you don't want to be stressing about it on the morning of race day or at the expo trying to figure out what you need to do. Dev, let's talk about the importance of bike setup, because this is something that, again, can help you have a better ride, but also be a lot more comfortable if you're out there for a long time.
Indeed. So, sorry, there's quite a feedback on my mic all of a sudden. I think I'm back. All right, so from a bike setup point of view, there's a couple of things to just take into account. So we talk bike setups, and whether you've just bought a new bike or you think you've been for a bike setup, more often than not, you've been told you're getting a bike setup and they might measure a saddle height or so and then say, right, you're good to go. That's not necessarily a full comprehensive bike setup. So when we start talking bike setup, we're talking accurate knee angles in terms of saddle height, saddle position in terms of how level the saddle is, forward and back, your reach to the handlebars, your drop from the saddle to handlebars, everything like your cleat placement. All of that is something that's going to improve your ride experience. And from a comfort point of view, an injury prevention point of view, and also a performance point of view, if you set up correctly, it's going to take longer for you to fatigue. You're not going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to be able to ride a lot harder without any sort of risk of pain. If you have done a bike setup, more often than not, I chat to guys and I ask them how their bike setup is and if they've done a bike setup. And I might get clients that'll tell me, yes, we did one and I did it 3 years ago. Now, the problem with that is your bike has gone in several times, well, hopefully has gone in several times for maintenance. So it's had something done and serviced. And there's very often where I've seen some mechanics put bikes, it doesn't want to fit because of the size of the bike, doesn't want to fit on the mechanic stand. So they adjust your seat to put it back on and they never really put it back to its same level. If you've traveled with your bike and you've taken the seat post out or adjusted something to put it into a box or a bike bag, all of that changes and you might not necessarily be putting it back to its exact measurements. With my athletes, I like to try and get my athletes to do 2 to 3 bike setups a year. Why I do that is it's a constant recheck. So if you are traveling, if you're moving things around, there's always tweaking that happens. And at the same time, your body starts to respond differently to the amount of training that you're doing or the lack of training. So if you're coming out of a lazy winter, for instance, and you did your bike setup in January, your body is now, you might be a little bit stiffer, might be less fit. So sitting on the bike now is going to take a little bit of getting used to. And remember, we do the bike setup to make you as comfortable as possible. And ideally, your bike setup should be fitting the bike to you as the individual and to your limitations, rather than saying, this is how tall you are, this is roughly what your setup should be, off you go. So it's important to just take that into account as well, that you do constantly need to be tweaking and rechecking your bike setup at the same time.
Cool. And you talk about dusting of cobwebs. That's got nothing to do with the night before, making sure your bike's clean from the year before. I had a colleague who that was the way he used to ride the Telkom 947 Dev. I kid you not. He used to take the numbers off and put the new ones on, because that's how he was starting. So not the best of advice if you want to have a comfortable day. Keep those questions coming through. You can pop them into the comments below the video. You can also do it on YouTube or on email. support@coachparry.com is that email address. We got an email in from Gavi. And Gavi was saying, just a question regarding online training. How long a ride should your long ride be on the weekend? When you talk long ride, what are you talking about, Dev?
Gary, I think that's going to be largely firstly dependent on what level you're at. So what level athlete you're at. If you a sub 3 hour athlete, you probably can be getting away with about a 3 to 4 hour kind of long ride. If you're a rider that's necessarily, and this is something I just also want to make quite clear, if you're targeting a sub 6 hour, for instance, so anywhere between a 5 or 6 hour kind of ride, you don't necessarily need to be out spending 5 or 6 hours on your bike every weekend, okay? Because you also don't necessarily have the time, and from that point of view, if you are spending that kind of time, I can tell you now you're going to be riding better than a sub 6 hour on race day at the same time. So what I would typically call a long ride is about anything between about a 2.5 to about a 4 hour ride, depending on your level and also depending on the intensity. If we're talking a club ride and we are going to be working higher intensity, you can probably get away with a 3 hour long ride. If you're doing something more of an LSD and a lower intensity, then about a 3 to a 4 hour kind of ride. It is quite important as to what you're focusing on, what your goal is, and also knowing the intensity. So this is why I say also don't focus too much on the distance that you're covering, because if you do a 4 hour ride and you're going to ride different routes, if you're riding 4 hours on a hilly route, you might only be doing 80 Ks, well, maybe even less if it's a hilly route. Whereas if you're doing a flat route, the same 4 hours might now get you an 80 or 90 kilometer kind of ride. So focus more on time, and it's time in the saddle and the kind of intensity that you're actually doing, rather than worrying too much about the distance when we refer to these long rides. Keeping in mind that your long rides should be your lower intensity rides more than anything else.
Yeah, and just a quick terminology thing. We've had this in the running space. We talk about it lots. LSD's got nothing to do with drugs. It's a long, slow distance. Just so you are aware. We've always been in the running space. It's beautiful. We have a lot of international athletes joining us, particularly around the Comrades Marathon, and some of the South African terminology they absolutely love. I think the last one we did, we were talking about pot plants. And a pot plant in South Africa is not the same as a pot plant in America. Just thought I'd let you know that. Keep those questions coming. Another question coming in from Rudolph. Dev Rudolph wants to know, I've been sick for 8 weeks with a bug. What can I do extra to get my fitness back quicker, or should I just make peace with the fact that it's going to be a fun day out? Are there any specific vitamins or supplements I can be taking or incorporating in my training right now?
Rudolph, firstly, if you've been sick for 8 weeks, let's just first and foremost make sure that you are 100% getting back into training. So if there's any risk of you still being sick, we don't want to drag it out to 9 or 10 weeks or even longer, or start looking at causing damage to the heart as well and all that. So from a health point of view, make sure you are 100% healthy, and maybe even get a doctor's clearance before you can get going. So that is going to be my first and foremost. 8 weeks, if you've been sick that long and you haven't been training, which hopefully you haven't, I think sort of come to peace with you've lost a big chunk of your training now. Like we said, 11 weeks out, you've still got lots of time you might not necessarily catch up to where you want to be or where you feel that you should be or have been, but there is time for you to make up. Don't feel that you need to start cramming though, and that's the one thing, because what will happen is your immune system over 8 weeks of being sick has taken a big shot. So if you now feel that you need to start cramming and trying to play catch up, unfortunately, there's a high risk that you are going to just end up being sick again. So my suggestion would be rather put a plan together or get in touch. Let's look at a training program for you, but start a little bit slower. If you're coming off that, your body is still trying to wean itself off being sick. So start slow and make sure that we build you up properly. So this year you might have to come to terms with it, unfortunately, sort of write off what the original goal was, set a plan B, and maybe we start looking a little bit longer term.
Okay, just so you know as well, we're going to be doing a few more of these in the build-up to race day of the Telkom 947, where we'll also be talking race day management a bit closer as well. Got a question in asking about if I'm going for a sub 3.5, what should I be going through halfway in Dev? Is that a question you can answer now, or would you rather be more comfortable putting that off onto the race day management and what people should be doing on race day?
Yeah, to be quite honest, I'd probably prefer to answer that closer to the time. So now I think it's our 2 week out webinar that we'll be doing.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is because I also haven't had an in-depth look at what the route's going to look like. Obviously, we've got an idea of what the route is. It doesn't change too much. But my suggestion is let's sort of touch base on that. I can give you more of an indication of cutoff times and times that you should be at certain targets based on what your goal is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we can, let's leave that for the 2 weeks out, the race day one, and we can talk across the board for the different times that we were chatting tonight, the sub 6, 5, 4, and 3. So that'll give you a fair idea on what we're sort of looking at. Keep those questions coming through. Just I wanted to share a few resources with you that we've put together that I think will be really helpful in your journey to race day. And for anyone who's done any of these sort of endurance events, you'll know that committing can be quite scary, and there's so much conflicting information out there. I mean, you just have to go onto Facebook and just see if somebody asks a question in a Facebook group or on a forum, and the different responses you get. So that conflicting information can be really, really confusing. And the good news is you're not alone, because so many people are in this boat. But the big question is, how do you know? And imagine a place where you can connect with other cyclists just like you. You can get access right up to date from the source, because I think that's important too. For anybody who's played broken telephone as a kid, you'll know exactly what it's like. This one gives the message to the next one, and before you know it gets down the line and it's something totally different. So I think it's important to look at why do people fail. And I think one of the main reasons is that some people never really commit. They think, oh, this would be cool to do, but I'm going to give it a try. But as soon as people really commit and sell out big time, then they start getting results. They also don't have a system or a training program to follow. I made this mistake when I started. I literally just went out there and tried to wing it and ride for 2 or 3 hours, didn't know what I was doing. And they also don't have access to timely and relevant information. And I think Rudolph's question's a great one, because that just sums up the point I'm trying to make, is if you're ill now, you need an answer to your question now. Or if you're struggling with an injury, you need an answer to that question now. And if you don't have access to timely and relevant info, you are destined to fail. And some people just don't have access to someone who can help them. So what they do is they go online and they go into these forums and they end up using conflicting information. So that's one of the big reasons why people fail. And I said, imagine a place, and we've got that place. It's coachparry.com. We offer cycling coaching, individualized packages with Devlin, and you can also be part of our online community. We've got training programs that you can download. If you go to coachparry.com/start, some of you would have seen those already that you can get. There's also a very active forum where you can get access to Devlin and our other coaches as well and get your questions answered at any time. And then also the Ride with Coach Parry podcast, check those out. There's live online seminars that we're doing now. We also do general seminars on nutrition and that sort of thing. We do regular lunch hour Q&A, so there's no agenda. You can just hop on a call with one of our coaches where you can ask them questions. And then there's that Coach Parry online community that I showed you, the forum and that as well. And what do you get for being part of the Coach Parry online community? Well, you get access to exclusive members-only content. You get access to the entire library of all the online seminars. We've been doing these for about 6 or 7 years, and it's a massive library of all that content. Members-only forum, you get access to the replays of these as well in that library, and it costs only 147 Rand a month. And if you join now, we'll give you a very special offer. If you join for a year, we'll give it to you for only $9.97. So you pay for 7 months and you get 5 free, and that'll keep you going for the next year, and you get access to all of that sort of stuff now. So the access code that you can use, just use the word Soweto, okay? It's one that we're running for the Soweto Marathon at the moment, but you can join for the Telkom 947 as well. The website to get to is coachparry.com/join. That's where you can get all the details. Upcoming dates for more of these webinars. We're going to be doing one on 27th of September. That's about 8 weeks to go. The 24th of October, that's 4 weeks to go to race day. And then 7th of November is 2 weeks to go to race day. So that's pretty much all.
Can I step in there quickly?
Yes, you can.
Sorry, I think I don't know if I heard incorrect, but I think that first one is the 26th of September, not 27th.
Sorry, 26th of September. I was looking at a 7 at the bottom of the page. My bad, I can't read. It is correct on the sheet. So those are the next ones, and hopefully you will join us for them. If there are any more questions, get them in. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and we don't want to keep you all night because it is a school night, so to speak. So if you've got any questions, the website, the email to send them to is support@coachparry.com. You can also pop them below the video as well if you have any questions. Dev, any parting shots from you at this stage? Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, look, I think we've covered everything. I think the biggest thing is do join us in the next couple. So we'll obviously start focusing a little bit more for the next 4-week block going into closer to race day. I think we've pretty much touched on everything. We can just recap on sort of the buzzword for the evening is the consistency of training. So make sure that you are consistently doing the work, gradually increasing your training load, staying healthy. So now is the time where you don't want to be getting sick, especially if your training is only really starting now and kicking off. So making sure that you're eating well, you're drinking lots, and I mean that from a water hydration point of view. And then also maybe look at a multivitamin or a vitamin C, and that there's a couple of people that might feel that it's not completely necessary, but try and keep yourself as healthy and injury-free as possible going in for the next 11 weeks. This is the time to start the crunch time, really, for building up to the race day.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a question in, Rian got his question in lastminute.com there. Rian, I'll get to it in a sec. But Dev, just to let everyone know, you talk about that consistency, and I'm a convert when it comes to consistency. I'm running a marathon next weekend, and I grabbed one of the running training programs off the coachparry.com website, and I've literally followed that thing to the T for 12 weeks, where I think I've only missed 2 sessions out of 12 weeks, and I cannot tell you what a difference that consistency is. I'm not running lots, I'm just running consistently, I'm injury-free, I'm healthy, and it's amazing what a big difference that makes. So if you haven't got yourself one of those training programs yet, please grab one. Go to coachparry.com/start. You can download one there. It's absolutely free, the generic one. If you want something that is more tailored to you, there's a block there that says custom. We can write you one up. Just go check that out as well. That's coachparry.com/start. That's where you can get all of those in. Louise saying thanks for an informative session. Louise, you're welcome. Hopefully we'll catch you in 4 weeks' time or in the forums. We're in there every day. Rian's question saying, I ride with my mountain bike and ride both on and off-road. I do have slicks, but don't want to keep them on keep on changing between slicks and the mountain bike tires. Will it be okay to train on the road with those mountain bike tires until about 2 weeks out and then change over to slicks?
Yeah, 100%. Again, there's no rule as to say you need to be on slicks or need to be on off-road tires. The riding on your knobblies, your mountain bike tires is probably actually going to help you a little bit from a strength point of view. So it's a little bit more resistance. It means you're going to be working a little bit harder. 2 weeks out, when you put those slicks on, you're going to feel like a hero on your bike and suddenly feel fit and strong. And also, if you are going to be riding, like you said, you don't want to be chopping and changing. So keep the mountain bike, the off-road wheels on at the moment. Do your off-road trails, get on the road with those, that's not a problem. And then, closer to the time, put them on. It's not that you need to necessarily get used to riding with slicks. It's not going to make that much of a difference for you in terms of the feel for the bike. It's just going to make it easier from a rolling resistance point of view on race day.
Yeah, and it does make a massive difference. Dev, you're right. Once you put those slicks on, you feel like you can win the Tour de France. It's amazing. It's like riding. Get yourself a backpack and put 10 bricks in the back, and then on race day ride without them. And see what that's like. But okay, don't do that. I'm not saying you must.
Please don't do that. I know a couple of people that coach like that. So.
No, don't do it. It's the point I'm trying to make. So, I think that's about it for the questions, Dev. I don't see any more coming through. It looks like it's speak now or forever hold your peace. It looks like we are done and dusted. Dev, it's been awesome. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully everyone who was on live with us tonight got a lot out of it as well. Don't forget, that's the URL. If you want to join us in that forum, all you need to do is head over to coachparry.com/join. That's where you can get all the details. Thanks a lot for joining us. Dev, have yourself a good one. I know you're heading down to the Western Cape for a mountain bike race this weekend. Good luck. And
thanks so much.
We look forward to seeing everybody fit and raring to go. Come Cycle Challenge Sunday, but we'll be chatting a few times between now and then as well. So thanks for your time tonight, Dev.
Great. Thanks a lot. It's been good.